name is Guille Paz. I don't like Guillermo. I like people to call me Guille. I'm from Argentina. I'm a front-end developer, and I'm actually working at Mango. Paz Guille is my Twitter, my GitHub. That's it. That's how they know me. Paz Guille. If you want to give your 2 cents on the talk or give feedback about the talk, or you're bored or whatever, just use the hashtag and I'll read it, and I'm going to use it as a feedback. So let's use the internet. I'm going to ask a question. Who has used ECMAScript 6? And who has used it in production? Who has created something and launched it into production? Okay, you work with me, so it's obvious. In Mango, we started to use ECMAScript 6 as of last year, inspired a little bit by JSConf Argentina, the talk that Jason gave. Even though in Mango we use an API REST to perform online payment, we have a dashboard for our clients where they can see the transactions that have been made and follow them up. All that application, we started migrating it to ECMAScript 6. The thing is, why did we do that? Why now? Because suddenly people came, why are you doing that now? The answer was, because that's cool. It's because that's what you have to use, and we want to use that because it's cool. But thinking ahead, it's a standard spec, and people who produce are implementing it a little bit. We were thinking, looking into the future, and we liked the idea of writing code that was going to be useful. And the short to long term, when the features were implemented. And looking ahead as, developers, it's pretty difficult to stay updated with the changes and join this to the day-to-day work. And being updated, learning, and making mistakes to us is very important. And also thinking about our code. As Jason commented, there are tons of features that have been added. And what they allow us is to create expressive code. We're writing what we actually need. We're not investing time in just writing implementations that the language should already have. And that allows us for the code to be easily understandable, not only as JavaScript developers, but also for other developers to understand the syntax and say, okay, this is what's happening here, which is sort of difficult when we start to do crazy things. And on the other hand, to us, it's important for us to standardize common practices that we have been using or forming. Sometimes there are rivalries in saying, oh, no, that's I do this way or that way. None of them is better. It would be good for us to use it in the same way to standardize common practices. Jason explained that very good, and I'm going to give some examples that sum up those 3 items. First off, the way we write ECMAScript modules, there are new syntax and an API that allows us to configure how we're going to load those modules. The API, I haven't looked into it. I don't know how it works. But I think that those were 2 ideas that were very clear to emphasize the items I mentioned previously. AMD, I used it not much. To make the slide, I had to look it over, how to define it, how to define the module. First, I name it, and then I tell it what other modules it's going to inherit. And as it receives the other 2 modules that it was requiring before, well, okay, it's useful. And then we have CommonJS that I like a lot more. I think it's friendlier. And we first required modules. The new syntax says, I have a module, I import the things I need, I do whatever I have to do, and then I export. In this case, I'm going to export the function. I export default only 1 value. And then classes, I think exactly the same as Jason, that when I worked with Java developers. They said maybe they don't have classes. Okay, there are no classes. There are constructive functions. So we call them classes. There are classes. Basically, the building function or class, the first letter capitalized. We had a function that allowed us to inherit from another place or extending what was happening there and adding methods to the prototype of the object prototype. What we're saying is easier. The difference between this and this, I really write what I need. The inherit function is no longer there. It disappeared because I can define a class, the slide out, that is going to extend from another module emitter, and I define different methods. So putting together these two things, we have that one code. For example, this is a module, a slide out. When we transcribe it to ECMAScript 6, this was the result, just with two features. So imagine if we use all the features that Jason mentioned, what we could really accomplish. There's a blog that Dan wrote. He's a front-end developer that works with me. He writes about the features we're using and how we're using them. And the thing is, how we can start to use this. As Jason said, transpilers, what are those? Does somebody write or wrote in CoffeeScript? For those who use CoffeeScript are probably used to this. There's a source code in one format that is going to go to another format. We have the syntax. We need to convert it to ECMAScript 5 to run it in the browser. We're using Babel. We started using it when it was called 625, so we've been using it from the beginning. And we're really happy because a lot of big companies trust it, and it boosted our confidence. How do we incorporate the transpiler into the build process? We're using browserify. Who's using browserify here? Most of you, probably. Yeah? It allows us to require and manage modules using CommonJS. And basically, our configuration is, I have some entries. We use it in debug mode. The browserify allows us to use plugins or transformations that are going to run. When a module is required, you can execute different transformations to do something in the code or, use plugins. In this case, we use a plugin to generate different packages. We have a single-page app that if we generate all our code in performance level, it killed us. So we generated different packages to see as the user is navigating. We have a transformation, as I told you, that is called babelify. It was created by the same guys as Babel, and they're updating it. And we have to add in our build process something that allows us to write in ECMAScript 6. It was as easy as adding one line of code. As of this moment, while we started writing with ECMAScript 6, we already had it. Once we run the build process, we had already ECMAScript 5. What happens in the browser? The code I'm generating when I run in the browser, does it work? Okay, supposedly it does, because the code that it's going to generate is ECMAScript 5. Most browsers have ECMAScript 5 support. In our case, we have to support IE8, but we have to support it. So for IE8, we were loading polyfills, which allowed us to execute methods that we don't have. Anyway, we have to keep using polyfills. For example, because when it transforms our code, it doesn't transform all the features we use. For example, if we're using object.assign or those methods, those object methods were not transpiled, so we use polyfills that incorporates that into the browser. So as Jason showed, this is the current state of the browsers. What features they're already implemented today? It's pretty red, the heat map. So we still need to keep using polyfills. Babel uses a polyfill that's called core.js. It's a library that offers support for ES5 and ES6. We were using ES5 ship, and we switched to core.js because what core.js allows us is to generate custom versions. In the beginning, we used core.js, threw it on the browser, and we were using the browser. We had ES5 things that were already defined, so we had a lot of weight into a browser that we needed, so it really hurt our performance. Custom build that we're only going to load in browsers from IE 9 and below, and then ES6 that we're going to use for all browsers. In the beginning, we generated the code, we started using it, and after that, when we started using the feature, it said object.assign, no define, and it's a good data to bear in mind. With just one conditional, as I said, we loaded the polyfill that we wanted in all polyfills, and then we loaded in all browsers. And then the comment comes back when we stop supporting IE8, and after a while, maybe we can.
Right now, we're like that, it's done. This is the time when we're flying, and it's amazing, but the truth is that when we start setting all the blocks up, we find that situation. Everything was so perfect, and when we said, okay, this is the right time, something had to go wrong, and we came across some issues. To understand the issues that we came across, it's important for me to tell you the context in which we're working, because you probably are facing a similar situation, but nevertheless, it's important for you to understand us. So in Mongo, we're not using any framework. We're not using Angular. We're not using Backbone, React, Ember. And we have modules. So that led us into having 110 modules to build our front end. So I know what you're thinking of, that we're treating you like that. We're treating our modules like that. And I can assure you that this is not true, because it's just two guys, another guy and I, in the front-end module, so it's something to bear in mind. And on the other hand, when we started writing the application, we started in one JavaScript version in which you have some things that belong to the version 3 or 5, and now we're in this sort of stage of migrations in which you have things written in ECMAScript 5 or 6 or 3. So that's something that you should take into account. The first problem that we had was dependencies, using browserify, and the way that we were exporting our modules, so that you can have an idea. The structure of files would be something like this. We have a source file with a boot.js that requires a lot of modules, a bus module that is local, and a package JSON to the dependencies, which we own. We have 110 modules. Each of us has its own repository with its documentation and tests, and the dependencies. Okay, so in this case, what I want to show is we have the bus.js module written in ES6 and the emitter module. Very simple, that module, the one that you're looking at. It imports emitter, it creates emitter instance, and it is exported. Very simple, very tiny. Let's run it in the browser, we said, and look what happened. What happened? We have the polyfills. Everything is all right. Why is this happening? So we take a look at the generated code, and this is so that you can have an idea what it was generated. Okay, so the upper part was good. It was using module.export, but in the bottom it said class emitter. But how come class emitter? What am I using a transpiler then for? And I went like that, because I said, hey, there's no way. I went crazy. But raising a couple of issues, and okay, we spent a day taking a look at a couple of things. We came across this. We're using the babelify transformation, and that's the file structure. So when babelify transformed the bus module, it was transformed all right. Now bus required emitter, as I showed you, and emitter was written also in ES6, but emitter is a dependency. So when it wants to go fetch the dependency, in a moment something was going wrong, But the thing is that browserify by default and all browserify transformation do not mess with the dependencies, because and that's all right, because they don't know what's the content, and we might not be the authors of that. So what can we do? In which way to run? So browserify lets us run transformations in a global way. What does this mean? That the transformation will be run anyway, no matter what the file is. You need to be careful, because the documentation says, okay, be careful in which way you use it. And we said, that's all right. All these modules are ours, so let's run them to see what happens. We went to the build processor, and we told browserify to run in a global way. We saw the output that was generated. It works all right. Fine. So today, that's the way we've solved it. And it's good for us because of the context, because all our dependencies, we own them. We know that everything that will be transformed is what we want to be transformed. And there is another way of doing this, that what says is, okay, you can use package.json, and the dependencies package.json, like emitter, which is the one that was not being transformed, we can tell it, okay, when browserify requires that module, it should apply a certain transformation, which is much cleaner. So do this. I really recommend. You have to include all the transformations that we include as a dependency, which can be sometimes a bit more expensive because babelify depends on Babel, and the process can be a bit complicated when you want to install it. In which way should you publish modules if you want to use ECMAScript 6? How can someone does it if it doesn't use browserify to require that module? It can't be written in ECMAScript 6. So the solution is pretty simple. You need to write in ES6 and you need to publish in ES5. That's something that we learned the hard way. It might have been obvious, but in a context we thought that there was no need to do that, but it's important anyways. So how can you do that very quickly? Let's suppose that you have a module. The idea is that you're going to have a source file with an index.js that is written in ES6. And you need to publish, you're going to publish the content in a dist folder, or you can call it anyway. And that should go through the transpiler and generate ES5 code. The first thing I need to do is to go to the package and tell it that the entry point is the one that's in the if directory, and then you create a compile task that you can do it with npm6, grunt, code, broccoli, whichever you want. I did it with npm6 because that's the one that we're used to. And basically you tell it, okay, compile a task, and you tell Babel to go into our directory and to transpile everything that's in there and to throw it into the dist folder. Then we run npm run compile, and the directory will be generated as we want it to. Another advantage, another improvement is to add a pre-publish script, which means every time you publish a module, doing an npm publish, that code will be run. So in this way, you can ensure that the code published is already transpiled. There is an example that you can take a look at. We did an emitter, just for you to know the process and how we're doing it, so you can check on that. And the other issue that we came across was inheritance, even though, well, now we'll take a look at that. We are inheriting in the following way. It can be judgeable. So there was an inherit module that requires an extend module, and what extend basically does is you pass it an object, and it takes all the properties of the object and it returns a new one. So we exported a function that received a dad and a son. It extended the dad's prototype into the son's, if you just in case you wanted to reuse it. And we had also the slider module that required an inherit, that required an emitter, that created the class, the construction function. It inherited, and it kept on extending the prototype, and then it exported. So what I want to focus on is the inherit function. It ran that inherit function. That inherit function, when we wanted to see, okay, how it was working, we saw that in slide out prototype, it was open, and open is the method that we have defined in that module. And where are all the emitted modules? We asked ourselves, okay, let's take a look at the emitted prototype. And there was nothing. So how come there is nothing? What's going on here? Reading it all over again, and this requires a lot of reading. We got to the spec, and it says that methods defined within class definitions are non-enumerable. This is in the specification. What does this mean? That when we iterate the prototype with an object.kiss and with for in, those properties won't be returned or enumerated. So what happens with Babel? Okay, it says, since we're sticking to the standard, we've already implemented that. So what was going on basically in the backstage is that when we wrote this in ECMAScript 6, we got this code. Using object-defined properties, it said, in emitter, the on method, enumerable and false. We cannot change that because it was already generated code. So we started doing some research again. That's why I'm telling you that it really took some time. Babel's got a module called lose mode that allows us to set up some, well, they call them transformations. So they generate code that is easier or at least less complex, but that is not so stuck to the standard and the specifications. So in this case, there is a transformation called ES6.classes, and what it tells us is that methods will be enumerable. So we want that. So we came back to the transformation, we set lose mode for this property. And when we saw the output, we saw that it was already using ECMAScript 6 and prototype. Okay, so we said, great, it's working. So when we took a look at what was inside the prototype, there was open ion, which is an emitter method. And we said, hey, wait, there's something that we're doing wrong, or we're just overlooking that. And this is when it comes into seeing object.create, which is a method incorporated in version 5, which basically what it does is to extend objects. And the first object that is passed to it is the prototype that is going to be extended. Sorry. Yeah. And it returns an object. So what we did was to replace that extend that we owned with object.create. So it's ES5, but we have polyfill, so it's going to work all right. We've eliminated a couple of... Another problem was with super this. We migrated slide out. It's written in 5, and we migrated it into ES6, and we told it, okay, extend emitter. We built the constructor, we defined some properties, and in the browser we had this. Sorry, not in the browser, in the console, when we wanted to transpile. So this is not allowed before super. What happened? What did we break? And basically what the standard says in the specification is that before you want to access or read or write this property of the class, you have to call the parent constructor, and this happens in all the derivative classes. So any class that extends another class, for that you need to call super. So classes, well, they become kind of weird. You need to be careful. You can get some situations, well, our case in particular, nothing happened. I think we checked it, but we thought, okay, so this is not just syntax sugar. Some things might be being broken. So there is a very interesting post of our developer that wanted to start using ES6 with Backbone. And when they released that specification, he said, hey, there are a few problems here. I really recommend you to read that. It's really interesting the way he explains all the issues that he came across. I'm really coming to the end. This was the last issue, import and hoisting. And what was defined was that import work as variables. When we define a variable anywhere in the code, when the variable is interpreted, it goes up, and so on and so forth. So we had a login view. We loaded the I18N module. we brought the translations in and we added them to a queue in which they loaded, and we ran functions that allowed us to render the login. So there is an import down there, and when we went to the browser, it says login-view.enter. So that was the key that we used just to translate. This is the generated code, and what was going on was that the ad, it was going down. It was being run last, and for us that was a problem, because we needed that to be done before being imported into the view itself. So this guy, Grushmeiter, he's great, but he loaded. He's great, but he loaded an issue that in Babel was already implemented. So what we needed to do was go back to an old version of Babel where this was not implemented yet. We haven't really solved this issue yet. We're going to have to sit down and fix that in order to go forward. Some things that I think it's very important for you to take from this talk. We need to use transpilers. In this case, we used Babel, but you can use any one you want. You have to use polyfills, even for ES6. If you're going to use babelify, take into account that you can run it in a global mode. That's not the recommended thing to do, but to use it with package.json. Another thing, we write in ES6 or whatever we want, but we always have to publish our code in something that most people can use. And last, if we use Babel, bear in mind loose mode and all the transformations that you can set up and such. Thank you very much.
Muchachos.